What if your blood cursed your entire lineage? Not with pain or madness, but with color. A color so unnatural, so startling, that it isolated your family for generations. Not for what they did, but for what they looked like. Imagine being born not red or brown or pale, but blue. Deep as indigo, your skin a canvas of contradiction. Alive yet ghost-like, vibrant yet spectral. Not a legend, not folklore. This was real. This was the Fugates. In the shadow-draped hills of eastern Kentucky, along the serpentine bends of Troublesome Creek, a man named Martin Fugate arrived in the early 1800s. An orphan, perhaps from France, perhaps not. His origins are hazy, like mist rolling over those Appalachian valleys. What is certain is that Martin carried something in his blood. A mutation. Silent, recessive, invisible, until it wasn't. He married Elizabeth Smith, a woman with alabaster skin and copper hair. She too carried the same hidden defect. A rare twist of fate brought them together, two people unknowingly tethered by a single genetic flaw. They would have many children, and when some of those children came into the world, their skin was not pink nor peach, but tinted blue. Not the blue of sadness, not metaphor, flesh as cerulean as the winter sky. And no one knew why. The midwives whispered. The neighbors stared. Some thought it was bad blood. Others sin. Some even said the devil walked among them. But within the log walls of that cabin on Troublesome Creek, the Fugates simply lived, raised children, worked the land, carried water, tilled soil, breathed, and all the while, a silent legacy passed from one generation to the next. A trait that would make their name immortal, their story sensational, and their very skin a symbol of one of the strangest genetic mysteries in American history. Born blue, and blamed for it, the mountains kept them hidden, not just from the world, but from time itself. The ridges of Appalachia wrapped around Troublesome Creek like a mother holding too tight. Narrow paths turned to mud in rain. Horses couldn't cross in winter. Letters never made it out. And the people within, they stayed, married, multiplied. The outside world drifted on, while the Fugates and those like them circled inward. In this isolation, nature played its quiet game. Genes once rare became common. Families once neighbors became kin. The same blood circled round and round. Smiths marrying Combs, Combs marrying Richies, Richies marrying Stacy. And always, always, someone marrying a Fugate. Zachariah Fugate, born with skin the color of dusk, would marry his own aunt. His son Levi, a carrier, wed a woman from the Ritchie line. Another family with the same cursed gene flowing quietly beneath pale skin. Their daughter, Luna, would be born in 1886 with skin so vividly blue, neighbors said she looked painted in flower dye. She would become the most striking figure in the lineage, the face of a forgotten mutation. But she wasn't alone. In this closed circle, the blue trait multiplied. What began as a statistical fluke became a familial feature. One descendant, tracing his lineage, half joked, "I'm related to myself." Another, less amused, refused to speak of it at all. There were no universities here, no doctors with microscopes or textbooks, only stories. Blue babies born in the night, mothers crying, fathers looking away. The hush of fear, the glare of shame. In a town where everyone bore a cousin's nose or a sibling's chin, genetic identity collapsed in on itself. The community became a loop, a spiral of inheritance so tight it blurred the lines between ancestry and self. Yet they lived. They worked the fields, chopped wood, hauled coal. They danced at harvests and sang in churches. Life went on, even as their blood quietly conspired to mark them different. And with every birth, a question lingered in the hush of the delivery room. Would this child be blue too? It wasn't a curse cast by gods. It was the math of blood, trapped in a box of hills and silence. At first, no one could explain it. The skin, the color, the eerie calm of their bodies. Some called it a punishment. Others believed their hearts were weak, their blood slow. A few simply said, "They're not like us." But the truth lay not in the heavens or the hells, it was in the blood. Not just any blood, but blood that could no longer breathe. Inside every red blood cell lies hemoglobin, the miraculous fairy that binds oxygen and delivers it to the body. But in the Fugates, that fairy was broken. The iron within their hemoglobin had oxidized, transforming into a variant called methemoglobin. It couldn't carry oxygen, couldn't release it, and worst of all, it gave the blood a murky chocolate hue. Seen through pale skin, it turned the body blue. The condition had a name: congenital methemoglobinemia. Rare, recessive, invisible until both parents passed on the same quiet mutation, a failure of an enzyme known as diaphorase 1, the very tool meant to reverse that oxidation. Without it, methemoglobin flooded the bloodstream, not enough to kill, just enough to transform. In most, it hovered between 10 and 20%, far below the danger zone, but high enough to turn lips cobalt and hands lilac. Higher still, above 50%, it could cause seizures, coma, even death. But that was not the Fugate story. Their blueness wasn't a death sentence. It was a visual whisper of something gone molecularly wrong, but not disastrously so. Still, the effect was profound. It erased trust, it invited stares, and it set fire to the imagination of a community clinging to superstition. They were accused of having thick blood, cold blood. Some even said their blood was too close to the skin, as if that explained the miracle. But the truth was clinical, elegant in its cruelty. They weren't cursed. They weren't possessed. They were born with a recessive flaw, one that bloomed only in the silence of isolation and the loops of kinship. Science would eventually uncover every detail. The enzymes, the genes, the treatments. But for over 100 years, the Fugates had only their blue skin and the shame that came with it. They weren't sick. They were misread. And sometimes, that's the cruelest fate of all. It began with a rumor. Whispers carried down from the Kentucky hills of a blue-skinned people tucked in the hollows, living quiet lives in shadow. Most doctors laughed it off. Tall tales, backwoods superstition, but not Dr. Madison Cowain. Fresh from medical school, drawn to blood like some men are drawn to war, Cowain heard the rumor and didn't dismiss it. He followed it into the ridges and folds of Appalachia, chasing not folklore, but something real, something hidden in hemoglobin. He wasn't alone. A nurse named Ruth Pendergrass had seen it with her own eyes. A woman walked into her clinic one winter morning, lips dark as ink, hands bluer than frostbite, calm, breathing, very much alive. Ruth had thought she was dying. She wasn't. Together, Cowain and Pendergrass began a kind of hunt. No labs, no grants, just old maps, word of mouth, and knocks on suspicious doors. And in a cramped waiting room in Hazard, Kentucky, they found what they'd been chasing: Patrick and Rachel Ritchie, two siblings, both blue. They stood back against the wall, trying not to be seen. Shame written in posture, not words. But Cowain saw something else. Not deformity, not disease. A puzzle, a pattern. Blood that wouldn't let go of oxygen. He drew samples, built a genealogy from fragments and memories, followed the roots back to Martin Fugate, mapped the web of cousins and children and cousins again. What he found echoed another study, from Alaska, where indigenous communities suffered a similar fate. The same enzyme missing, the same result. And with that came the answer. A treatment simple in delivery, profound in effect. Methylene blue. One injection. And within minutes, Patrick and Rachel's skin flushed pink for the first time in their lives. They were stunned. Cowain, too. It wasn't magic. It wasn't a cure. But it was proof. Proof that the so-called curse was simply chemistry. that what fear had twisted for a century, science could untangle in a day. In that small clinic, something changed. Not just blood, but dignity. Because truth, at last, had found the blue people of Kentucky. He came into the world screaming, as all babies do. But when the nurses saw his skin, deep purple, almost violet, they didn't hear life. They heard alarm bells. Benjamin Stacy was born in a hospital near Hazard, Kentucky in 1975, and within moments, he was rushed into intensive care. Oxygen was administered. Monitors beeped. Panic stirred, until his grandmother stepped in. "It's just the Fugate blood," she said, calm as winter. "Runs in the family." Doctors paused, looked again, and then the color began to fade, slowly, subtly, like twilight slipping into dawn. Benjamin wasn't dying. He was simply carrying the last visible echo of a mutation passed down over a century. A child born not of pathology, but of ancestry. He would grow pinker with time. His skin would normalize. But even as a toddler, when he cried or got cold, his lips would bloom a faint blue, as if some hidden part of history still stirred beneath the surface. Benjamin was the last of them. No other child has since been born visibly blue in the Fugate line. Roads had come. Mobility had come. Outsiders married in. The loop broke. The blood thinned. And with that, the blue disappeared. But not entirely, because stories linger. Medical journals still cite the Fugates as the textbook case of recessive inheritance in isolated populations. Artists paint Luna's indigo skin. Novelists reimagine Troublesome Creek. And in college classrooms, their legacy is retold, not as anomaly, not as sideshow, but as lesson. Benjamin Stacy's birth was not an ending. It was a threshold. A moment when the past looked the future in the eye and quietly stepped back into memory. The blue was gone, but the name remained. They called it the worst mutation in American history. They were wrong. It wasn't a mutation that cursed the Fugates. It was misunderstanding. It was isolation. It was the cruel human instinct to fear what we don't recognize, to mock what doesn't mirror us. The blue was never the enemy. For the Fugates, the true weight wasn't their skin. It was the stares, the rumors, the feeling that you had to explain your body before you could be seen as human. And still, they lived. They farmed. They married. They buried. They endured. Science eventually caught up. It gave their children medicine. It gave their story a name. It gave them, at last, clarity. But long before the methylene blue and the blood tests, they had survived. On their own, with dignity. Today, the blue has faded from flesh, but it survives in canvas and classroom and culture. It reminds us that biology doesn't define worth, that genetics may shape skin, but it does not shape soul. The Fugates were not cursed. They were human, made myth by ignorance, made memory by truth. And in the quiet hills of Kentucky, where Troublesome Creek still winds through the mountains, the story lingers, not as a warning, but as a whisper, that even in the darkest corners of history, beauty waits to be understood.